So, to summarize, the existence of private property is absolutely essential, it seems to me, to make the government dependent on the people and not the people dependent on the government, and to have the government observe the rights of citizens, legal rights, financial rights, economic rights, and so on. Socialist countries, communist countries, which ignore this, became dreadful despotisms, of which communist Russia was a perfect example. Now you have a very interesting development in China, which maintains the communist system and at the same time allows private property. It's a very unusual situation, and I don't think it will last. My prediction is, I probably won't live long enough to see it, but you're young enough, or most of you are young enough to see it, that eventually private property will prevail and civil rights will win in China, and China will become a democracy. Maybe in 20 years, maybe in 30, maybe in 50, I don't know. But where there is private property, there the government cannot rule in a despotic manner in the long run. So that's really all I have to say, and I'm opening myself to questions. Yes?
Yeah, just about your late argument, what makes China communist?
What is what?
What makes China communist? It's just a capitalist country with a dictatorship.
Well, you're quite right, because in the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, which is kind of communist charter of the communist society, Marx and Engels said, if you had to define communism in one sentence, it is the abolition of private property. But the Chinese realized that without private property they're going to go nowhere.
There are no communists anymore. There are only communists
certainly the Communist Party rules. It has absolute power,
it's like the
but it's not a communist country in the traditional sense of the word. Of course it is not.
When did they come to realize this?
When they what?
When did they come to realize that private property makes all the difference?
Well, it's after the death of Mao,
The
when they gradually started introducing private property. China today is a most capitalistic country. I was there 3 times, and last time 2 or 3 years ago I traveled all across the country. The businesses that go on, the peddling that goes on, it's unbelievable. It's far more than in our Western countries.
More skyscrapers than anywhere.
And this is incompatible with the political system, which gives people no rights whatsoever to express their political preferences. So my guess is, and I was right in the case of the Soviet Union, I was right in the case of the Soviet Union that it will disappear eventually, because it could not last. And I think in the case of China, you're going to see a tremendous outburst of private demands on the government and eventually democracy. Yes?
I just want to say that at least in one aspect, private property and freedom are complete opposites when you think about slavery.
I'm sorry, can you speak louder? I don't hear you.
What I said is that in at least one aspect, private property and freedom are complete opposites when you think about slavery. That in a way that was private property, people had the right to have a property, but they had a right
Sure.
to people's property.
Well, in the case of slavery, indeed, it was absolutely contradictory. And of course, slavery was ultimately abolished for that reason. It was a contradiction in terms. And owning human beings is not a form of private property. Yeah.
Sir,
Loud.
as we all know, most of your reputation comes from being an expert in Russian history. In fact, I think you are one of the foremost authorities in this field. And I think many of us will be interested in hearing what is your opinion about the situation in modern Russia. What is its nature and its prospects?
Well, it's a very good question, and very difficult to answer. Russia is full of contradictions. I was just there 3 days ago, lecturing. It's a contradictory country. Its tradition is, as I described, essentially the Mongol tradition that the rulers both ruled and owned, and that the people had no rights. And if you look at public opinion polls, you find that most Russians are perfectly satisfied with that. They don't believe in freedom. They don't believe in the multi-party system. They don't believe in democracy. They think democracy is a fraud, and that it brings with it anarchy and crime. There are about 10 or 15% of Russians, the so-called intelligentsia, who think differently, who hold our Western values. And the country is constantly tossing, there are these conflicts between the intelligentsia and the masses of the people. I was in September in Russia at an annual conference called the Valdai Club. It's a very interesting group. It's not well known, it's not publicized. The Valdai group is organized and financed by the Russian government. It consists, it's an annual meeting for about a week or 8-9 days. It meets in various places. Half of the participants are Russians and half the participants are foreigners. And you discuss anything you want, any problems dealing with Russia, Russian relations with foreign countries and so on. I was astonished at the freedom of speech that existed. We were on a boat, on a river boat, and we traveled to Lake Onega in the north for a whole week. And the Russian participants were far more aggressive, criticizing the Russian government. Well, we foreigners. We were a little bit tenuous. And you go to universities, you go to economic institutes and so on, and people speak freely, criticize the government, say that Russia is in a horrible mess and so on. And you talk to common people and they think very differently. So there's a horrendous conflict there between the intelligentsia, representing about 10 or 15% of the population, and the masses of the people, overwhelmingly descendants of serfs, because serfdom in Russia was only abolished in 1861. The 80% population was serfs, and 80% of the population are descendants of these serfs. And how this is going to be resolved is very hard to say. You have, on the one hand, you have someone like Putin, who appeals to the peasant descendants who don't want democracy, don't want property, don't want civil rights. And you have someone like Medvedev, who in a very cautious way appeals to the intellectuals. We must have rights in Russia. We must respect human freedoms. We must modernize Russia. Now, it was thought until recently that 2 years from now, Medvedev will quietly retire and Putin will run for president and he'll be elected, and that's that. But just the other day when I was there, one of Medvedev's assistants declared that Medvedev intends to run for president. You're going to have a terrible brawl in 2 years between Putin and Medvedev. I would, if I were to bet, I would bet on Putin, because he's much more popular support. But we will see. Anyway, that's what it is. It's this terrible conflict between these two trends in Russian life.
Do you believe social democracy respects private property?
No. No. Social democracy doesn't know. It nationalizes it. I mean, I'm not talking about shirts and cars and apartments. I'm talking about productive wealth. That is land, industry, trade, and so on. It's all nationalized. Did you want to have that?
You spoke about the division between government and ownership. But what